What's up, HOA Warriors? Today, we're diving into one of the most literary HOA battles ever waged. A Texas comedian who got fined by his HOA and clapped back by rewriting their notice like William freaking Faulkner. That's right, he turned suburban pettiness into gothic poetry. And the results? Hilarious, brilliant, and weirdly profound. Every legendary HOA battle needs a main character. Sometimes it's a suburban parent who just wants a swing set in their yard. Sometimes it's a retired couple defending their Christmas lights. And sometimes, if the HOA gods are feeling especially ironic, it's a Texas comedian with a gift for words, a lifelong love of literature, and the comedic instincts of someone who knows how to turn a headache into a viral monologue. That's exactly who we got in Jerry Wayne Longmire. Jerry Wayne Longmire isn't your average HOA victim. He's not the guy grumbling quietly in his garage, paying fines under protest, or muttering, "Someday I'll move to the country." Nope. Jerry is a stand-up comedian, a storyteller, a podcaster, and, crucially, a lifelong Faulkner fan. This man has been soaking in Southern Gothic prose the way most Texans soak in iced tea on a summer afternoon. So when he got an HOA notice telling him his trash can was unsightly and his shutters were the wrong color, he didn't just roll his eyes and pay the fine. He did what comedians do best. He turned pain into performance. But here's the twist. Jerry didn't just crack a few jokes. He elevated the HOA's bland, bureaucratic letter into art. He took the spirit of William Faulkner, Nobel Prize-winning master of long-winded, complex, deeply Southern storytelling, and applied it to the ultimate suburban villain, a plastic trash can. And the results? Hilarious, brilliant, and weirdly profound. Picture the setup. Jerry opens his post with the line, "They say my trash can lingers too long at the curb, lording like a broke cousin who doesn't know when to go home." Pause and let that sink in. Most of us would have written, "HOA says I left my trash can out." Jerry wrote a whole Southern Gothic metaphor about freeloading relatives overstaying their welcome. That's the difference between HOA annoyance and HOA immortality. Then he moves on to his shutters. The HOA said turquoise wasn't allowed. Jerry said turquoise was a hymn to the Gulf Coast waters of his childhood. Rejected by an HOA, it demanded beige, the color of cowardice. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not just a clapback. That's literature. That's roast comedy dressed in Sunday best prose, the kind of insult that hits so hard you feel it in your homeowner's insurance. And here's the beauty of it. Jerry wasn't just mocking his HOA. He was holding up a mirror to the absurdity of suburban micromanagement. HOAs are supposed to keep neighborhoods orderly, protect property values, and manage community spaces. In practice, they nitpick, they fine, they send letters about trash cans and shutters like they're the FBI. Jerry's response made the absurdity obvious by showing how ridiculous their demands sounded when filtered through Faulkner's dramatic lens. And the reason it worked so well is simple. Jerry didn't meet pettiness with anger. He met it with art. Instead of throwing a fit, he turned their letter into performance poetry. He weaponized his sense of humor and his love of Faulkner to expose just how silly the whole thing really was. And in doing so, he gave voice to millions of homeowners who've been burned by HOAs before. Because here's the thing, this wasn't just about shutters and trash cans. This was about individuality versus conformity. It was about turquoise versus beige, color versus blandness, personality versus bureaucracy. Jerry stood up to the HOA, not with fists, not with a lawyer, but with wit. And people loved him for it. In Jerry Wayne Longmire, we don't just see a comedian cracking jokes about neighborhood drama. We see a resistance fighter, armed with sarcasm instead of swords, humor instead of hammers. The HOA tried to put him in his place, and instead he put them in the annals of internet history. It was a mic drop moment Faulkner himself would have tipped his hat to. But Jerry's genius wasn't just in his words. His HOA satire hit so hard because it tapped into something bigger. America's long, messy, love-hate relationship with homeowners associations. And trust me, the numbers don't lie. Before we dissect more of Jerry's Southern Gothic clapbacks, we need to understand the battlefield. America's complicated relationship with HOAs. Because Jerry's post didn't just make people laugh, it made them nod in recognition. And that's because HOA frustration is practically a national pastime. Let's hit the stats. About 18% of Americans, roughly 1 in 5, live in a community with an HOA. If we zoom in on homeowners specifically, the number jumps to 27%. That's over a quarter of American homeowners living under HOA rules. So these aren't fringe organizations, they're everywhere, like mosquitoes in August or pumpkin spice lattes in October. Now here's where it gets juicy. Surveys show that most people don't even like living under an HOA. According to YouGov, 61% of Americans say they'd rather live in a community without one. Only 14% say they'd prefer to live in an HOA-controlled neighborhood. 14%. That's the same number of people who willingly read the terms and conditions on iTunes. In other words, it's a very small, very particular club. Why the dislike? Because HOAs are like an extra layer of government, but without the training, accountability, or, frankly, this sense of humor. They exist to enforce rules, maintain appearances, and theoretically protect property values. And while that sounds noble on paper, in reality, it often feels like being policed by your nosiest neighbor. Picture it. You're juggling work, bills, family, and life. You forget to roll your trash can in by 9:01 a.m., and boom, fine. You paint your shutters a color that reminds you of your childhood, and bam, violation notice. You decide to grow tomatoes in your front yard to save money and eat healthier, and guess what? The HOA swoops in with a cease and desist. It's not just annoying, it's exhausting. And that's why Jerry's letter struck such a chord. His HOA wasn't unique. His frustrations weren't rare. He was speaking the language millions of Americans already understood, the language of exasperation. When he wrote about his trash can lording like a broke cousin, it wasn't just a metaphor. It was a universal experience dressed up in Faulkner's Sunday best. HOAs position themselves as guardians of property value, but let's be honest, nobody's buying a house because the shutters are beige instead of turquoise. Nobody's saying, well, we were going to buy here, but then we saw a trash can by the curb for 12 extra minutes, so we walked away. Yet, HOAs cling to these tiny details as if the housing market depends on them. Jerry's satire ripped the curtain away, exposing the silliness hiding underneath the authority. And that's why his story went viral. It wasn't just funny, it was collective therapy. People read it and thought, finally, someone said what we're all thinking. For every person fined for weeds, every homeowner told to repaint a fence, every family scolded for leaving up Christmas lights too long, Jerry's words were vindication. That's the real power of comedy in this context. It's not just entertainment, it's solidarity. Jerry's HOA notice turned into a rallying cry because it wasn't just about one comedian in Texas. It was about all of us, everywhere, dealing with the small tyrannies of everyday life. So yes, America has a complicated relationship with HOAs. We want order, but we hate overreach. We like tidy lawns, but we resent being told how to mow them. And when someone like Jerry turns that frustration into Faulknerian art, it doesn't just go viral, it becomes suburban legend. Transition to fact number 3. And speaking of legends, let's zoom in on the specific violation that lit this whole saga on fire, the infamous trash can. Because if you thought a plastic bin couldn't inspire Southern Gothic poetry, you clearly haven't met Jerry Wayne Longmire.
Every suburban war has its spark, its Pearl Harbor moment, its match to the gasoline-soaked pile of frustration. For Jerry Wayne Longmire, that spark wasn't a fence, or a lawn, or even those famously controversial Christmas lights. No, it was something far more mundane, far more absurd. His trash can. According to his HOA, Jerry's trash can lingered too long at the curb. That's right, this entire literary showdown was sparked by a piece of molded plastic designed to hold banana peels and Amazon boxes. The HOA called it unsightly, like it was some dangerous fugitive staining the neighborhood's reputation. But Jerry called it poetry. In his Faulknerian retelling, he described the bin as lording like a broke cousin who don't know when to go home. Now pause for a second. Picture that line. Most of us, when scolded by an HOA for leaving out the garbage can, might groan, curse, and drag the bin back to the garage. Maybe we'd vent to a spouse or post a rant on Facebook. Jerry, on the other hand, transformed it into a metaphor about freeloading family overstaying their welcome. That's not just comedy, it's Southern Gothic magic. But here's what makes the trash can fight so absurdly perfect. It highlights the microscopic level of control HOAs often try to exert. Think about it. Your HOA doesn't maintain your trash, they don't empty it, they don't pay for it. Yet, they feel entitled to tell you how long your bin can sit in front of your house. They treat it like a hostile invader of suburban aesthetics. And if you don't comply, fine, violation, more paperwork. This is where the satire lands hardest, because the truth is, nobody's property value has ever been destroyed by a trash can sitting out an extra couple of hours. No one has ever driven past a house, seen a bin on the curb and thought, well, there goes $20,000 off the resale price. And yet, HOAs act like a wayward garbage can is the first horseman of the suburban apocalypse. Jerry's description worked because it exposed the absurdity. By writing about his bin in the style of Faulkner, long-winded, dramatic, dripping with existential weight, he revealed how ridiculous the HOA's priorities really were. The trash can became a character, a freeloading relative, an unwanted guest overstaying their welcome. And in doing so, Jerry turned the HOA's dry, bureaucratic complaint into comedy gold. The internet loved it because it resonated. Who hasn't forgotten to pull in their trash can right away? Who hasn't left it out overnight after a long day of work? It's one of the smallest, most human mistakes you can make, and HOAs love to weaponize it. Jerry's poetic roast gave people permission to laugh at that pettiness instead of feeling guilty or defeated by it. But there's a deeper layer here, too. Trash cans, in suburban HOA culture, are symbolic. They're not just bins, they're battlegrounds. They represent the HOA's obsession with surface-level appearances. Forget whether your house is structurally sound, forget whether your community is thriving. If the trash can is visible, the HOA will pounce. It's all about control. And that's why Jerry's trash can joke hit so hard. It wasn't just about a bin. It was about everything the bin represented. The HOA's constant surveillance, their relentless nitpicking, and their belief that conformity is more important than common sense. And the best part? Jerry didn't fight them with anger. He didn't throw the bin into the HOA office. He didn't storm the next board meeting with torches. He used humor. He turned their own ridiculousness into a punchline so sharp that the HOA became the butt of their own joke. That's power. So yes, the trash can of doom wasn't just a plastic container. It was the symbol of everything wrong with HOA culture. And Jerry, with his Faulknerian prose, turned it into a suburban legend. But if the trash can was funny, The shutters were pure poetry, because when your HOA demands beige shutters and you call beige the color of cowardice, you're not just roasting them, you're rewriting the whole neighborhood's narrative.
If Jerry's trash can metaphor was a jab, his shutter description was a knockout punch. You see, Jerry's shutters weren't just a color choice. They were turquoise, a bold, vibrant shade that reminded him of the Gulf waters where he grew up. To him, turquoise wasn't paint, it was memory, identity, and pride. But to the HOA, turquoise was non-compliant. The board demanded beige. Beige, the HOA's favorite color, the official shade of conformity, the paint equivalent of white bread. And Jerry, in his Faulknerian wisdom, didn't just call it bland, he called it the color of cowardice. That line alone deserves to be carved into the stone tablets of suburban history. Think about how powerful that phrasing is. Beige isn't just dull, it's cowardly. It represents fear. Fear of standing out. Fear of being different. Fear of letting a community breathe with individuality. By demanding beige shutters, the HOA wasn't just enforcing a rule, they were enforcing uniformity at the expense of personality. And Jerry called them out with one poetic sentence. This is why the story resonated so widely, because everyone knows what beige means in HOA land. Beige is the approved siding color. Beige is the acceptable fence stain. Beige is the safe choice that keeps the board happy. And turquoise? Turquoise is rebellion. Turquoise is self-expression. Turquoise is saying, "This is my house, and I refuse to live in a cardboard cutout." But Jerry's brilliance was in how he framed it. He didn't just say, "They don't like my shutters." He made it Southern Gothic. His turquoise shutters became a hymn, a connection to his boyhood, a poetic memory tied to the Gulf. The HOA's demand for beige became not just nitpicking, but symbolic violence against individuality. In his telling, it wasn't about paint. It was about the crushing weight of conformity. And the internet loved it. People aren't just tired of HOA fines. They're tired of neighborhoods that look identical. Every house painted the same, every yard manicured the same, every holiday decoration strictly timed and regulated. It's suffocating. Jerry's color of cowardice line tapped into that frustration perfectly. It gave people language to express what they've felt for years, that HOAs don't protect neighborhoods, they sterilize them. The shutter battle also highlighted the absurdity of HOA logic. Supposedly, HOAs enforce color rules to protect property values. But let's be honest, has anyone in the history of real estate ever said, "We would have bought that house, but the shutters were turquoise instead of beige"? Of course not. Buyers care about location, price, and condition, not whether the paint palette matches the HOA-approved beige swatch. The whole idea is nonsense. By roasting beige as cowardice, Jerry stripped away the illusion of authority. He showed that HOA rules aren't grounded in logic, they're grounded in personal preference masquerading as law. And when you shine that truth through the lens of satire, it becomes painfully obvious. But there's also something inspiring in Jerry's words. He wasn't just defending shutters, he was defending individuality. His turquoise wasn't just a color, it was a stand against monotony. It was proof that homeowners don't want to live in cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every house looks like a clone. People want personality. They want stories. They want shutters that sing hymns, not shutters that cower in cowardice. So in the end, the shutter saga wasn't just funny, it was profound. Jerry turned a beige versus turquoise battle into a metaphor for conformity versus courage. And in doing so, he gave everyone trapped in an HOA-controlled beige box a little hope, a little laughter, and a reminder that sometimes rebellion can be as simple as paint.
But Jerry's brilliance wasn't just in what he wrote. It was in how he wrote it. Because turning HOA notices into Faulknerian poetry doesn't just make people laugh. It turns petty bureaucracy into performance art. If the trash can was the spark and the shutters were the knockout punch, then Jerry Wayne Longmire's real genius lies in the method itself, fusing comedy with literature. Let's be honest, nobody in the history of HOA finds ever thought, you know what this letter needs? A little William Faulkner. But that's exactly what Jerry did, and it worked like wildfire. Here's the thing about satire. It thrives when it takes something deadly serious and exaggerates it until the ridiculousness shines through. Jerry didn't just poke fun at his HOA for their nitpicky rules. He put their entire operation under a literary microscope and made them look laughable in the process. By writing his HOA notice in Faulkner's voice, he dressed their small-minded authority in big, dramatic clothing. It's like giving a chihuahua a gladiator's armor. You don't make it scarier, you make it hilarious. Faulkner's writing is known for being long, winding, and filled with deep existential themes about life, death, decay, and the human condition. Jerry borrowed that style and applied it to his trash can. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't just issuing a violation, they were characters in a tragic Southern Gothic drama, lording over a neighborhood as if the fate of the world depended on shutter colors and bin placement. The comedy landed not because the subject matter was silly, but because Jerry elevated it to absurd heights. And that's why people couldn't stop sharing it. His HOA notice wasn't just a complaint, it was performance art. It was a masterclass in taking the language of bureaucracy and flipping it into the language of parody. You don't expect to hear about clipboards for hearts in an HOA letter. You don't expect a trash can to be described as a freeloading cousin. And you certainly don't expect beige shutters to be roasted as the color of cowardice. That's the magic. It's unexpected, but it's also so spot on that you can't help but laugh. What makes this even better is that Jerry wasn't just doing a one-off gag. He had practice. Months earlier, he'd gone viral reading his electric bill like Faulkner, a $700 bill he described as a punishment for his sin of comfort when he set the thermostat to 71 degrees in August. That video wasn't just funny, it was brilliant. He took something frustrating and turned it into literature. And when the HOA gave him fresh material in the form of a violation letter, he was ready. This wasn't Jerry stumbling into a bit. This was Jerry refining a craft. There's also something empowering about what Jerry did. HOAs thrive on their position of authority. They write letters, issue fines, and expect compliance. Their communication style is dry, detached, and intimidating by design. But Jerry flipped the script. By answering them in the voice of Faulkner, he stripped away their intimidation factor and made them clowns in his story. The HOA wasn't scary anymore. They were supporting characters in a comedy sketch. This is why humor is such a powerful tool against authority. Where anger escalates and lawsuits drain your wallet, laughter disarms. It changes the narrative. When Jerry reframed his HOA as the villains in a Southern Gothic parody, he didn't just win laughs, he won control of the story. And in battles with HOAs, control of the story is priceless. It also made the whole ordeal entertaining for everyone else. Think about it. HOA fights usually stay hidden behind closed doors. They're boring, frustrating, and often depressing. Jerry cracked that door open, invited the internet inside, and handed us a front row seat to suburban absurdity. Suddenly, it wasn't just Jerry versus his HOA, it was Jerry and millions of viewers laughing at the HOA. So yes, Jerry's genius wasn't just in the lines he wrote, it was in the style he chose. By marrying comedy and literature, he elevated a petty neighborhood spat into a viral cultural moment. He reminded us that humor can be sharper than any fine, and satire can make even the most humorless bureaucrats look ridiculous. And speaking of viral, let's talk about what happened when Jerry shared his HOA saga with the world. Because if you thought the HOA was embarrassed before, wait until you hear how the internet responded.
The HOA might have thought they were just sending Jerry a quiet little violation notice, but what they really did was hand him a golden ticket to internet stardom. Because once Jerry read his Faulknerian response aloud and shared it online, the floodgates opened. And the internet did what the internet does best. It laughed, it roasted, and it turned a suburban spat into a global spectacle. Let's be real. HOA drama is the perfect viral content. It's petty, it's relatable, it's universal. Whether you live in Texas, Toronto, or Timbuktu, you understand the absurdity of someone nitpicking over trash cans and paint colors. And when Jerry wrapped that absurdity in literature, people couldn't click share fast enough. The video shot around Reddit, Twitter, and TikTok, pulling in thousands of comments from people who had their own HOA horror stories to tell. The reactions were almost unanimous. This man was a hero. One commenter said they'd pay money to see Jerry turn their HOA letters into Faulknerian readings. Another declared that his line about beige shutters being the color of cowardice deserved to be taught in English classes. People weren't just laughing, they were cheering. They saw Jerry not as just a comedian, but a voice for everyone who'd ever been harassed by a clipboard-wielding neighbor. And here's the delicious irony. HOAs hate attention. They thrive in the shadows, operating quietly with letters slipped into mailboxes and fines delivered through official channels. Their bureaucracy is built on intimidation, not spectacle. But once Jerry went viral, the HOA lost control of the narrative. They weren't just a local board anymore. They were the butt of a global joke. And you can bet that stung worse than any unpaid fine. The viral spread also revealed something deeper. People are starving for ways to laugh at everyday frustrations. Life is stressful enough. Bills, inflation, politics, you name it. Then add an HOA fine for your trash can, and it feels like the world is piling on. Jerry's reading gave people permission to step back and say, "This is ridiculous. Let's laugh instead of cry." And laughter's contagious. That's why his post exploded the way it did. It wasn't just funny, it was cathartic. It also turned Jerry into a kind of folk hero. He wasn't some big-name celebrity roasting an HOA for clicks. He was a regular guy, a homeowner, a comedian who took his personal frustration and turned it into something bigger. People connected with that authenticity. He wasn't punching down. He was punching up, taking aim at a system that everyone secretly hates. That's why the internet embraced him so fully. And let's not forget, once something goes viral, it takes on its own life. Jerry's letter is now part of the great internet archive of HOA absurdities. Years from now, people will still be quoting the color of cowardice in comment sections. Students might stumble across his reading in media studies classes. The HOA thought they were protecting property values, but what they really did was create a cultural artifact. Here's the best part. Virality is a kind of accountability. HOAs can usually operate unchecked, enforcing ridiculous rules without scrutiny. But when their nonsense becomes internet famous, they lose their power. They can't backpedal fast enough. They can't explain why a turquoise shutter is such a threat when millions of people are mocking them online. Jerry didn't just win laughs, he won the battle for public opinion. So yes, Jerry's HOA story went viral, and in doing so, it reminded the world that sometimes the best way to take down petty authority is to shine a big, bright spotlight on its absurdity. The HOA wanted compliance. What they got instead was ridicule, mockery, and a comedian's words etched into the internet forever. But here's the twist.
Jerry didn't stumble into this viral moment by accident. He'd already sharpened his skills on another unlikely target, his sky-high electric bell. And that practice made him perfectly prepared for his HOA showdown.
If Jerry's HOA showdown felt too polished, too perfectly executed, that's because it wasn't his first rodeo. Nope, Jerry had already gone viral once before. Long before his HOA handed him the comedy equivalent of a golden platter. His training ground? A $700 electric bill. That's right. Months earlier, Jerry had taken his eye-watering utility bill and turned it into a Faulknerian tragedy. Picture it. A piece of mail that usually sends people into spirals of despair became, in Jerry's hands, a theatrical performance. He read that bill like it was a Southern Gothic novel, complete with poetic lamentations about the sin of comfort that came from setting the thermostat to 71 degrees in the blazing Texas heat. He described his crime not as carelessness, but as indulgence. A moment of weakness punished by the gods of electricity with a bill that rivaled car payments. Sound dramatic? Exactly! That's the brilliance. Jerry took something painfully ordinary, something we all complain about, and dressed it in grandeur. Suddenly, paying too much for air conditioning wasn't just a financial burden, it was a tragic epic. And audiences ate it up. That video spread across TikTok and Reddit, pulling in millions of views. It proved two things. Jerry had a gift for parody, and audiences loved watching him turn life's smallest annoyances into theatrical spectacles. So by the time his HOA came knocking with their clipboard and their beige demands, Jerry was ready. The HOA thought they were catching him off guard, but in reality, they handed a veteran performer fresh material. To borrow a boxing metaphor, this wasn't Jerry stepping into the ring for the first time. It was a seasoned fighter being thrown a punching bag, and boy, did he swing! The connection between the electric bill and the HOA letter is crucial because it shows Jerry's consistency. This wasn't just a one-hit wonder moment. This was a guy with a clear comedic voice, a recurring bit, and the ability to apply it to anything life threw at him. That's why people rallied behind him, because they'd seen it before, and they knew this wasn't luck, it was skill. And there's something incredibly relatable about the progression, too. First, Jerry mocked a utility bill, something we've all cursed at least once in our lives. Then he mocked an HOA, something millions of Americans have beef with. These weren't distant, highbrow issues. These were everyday frustrations turned into art. Jerry wasn't poking fun at celebrities or politics or abstract concepts. He was poking fun at the exact kinds of things that make us grind our teeth in the suburbs. But here's the kicker. His practice with the electric bill taught him something important about the internet. People love satire, but they adore satire that feels authentic. When Jerry read his bill, he wasn't pretending. He was genuinely annoyed at the cost. When he read his HOA letter, he wasn't faking. He was genuinely irritated by their demands. That sincerity made the comedy land harder. You can tell when a performer is forcing it. Jerry didn't have to. Life gave him the material, and he spun it into comedy gold. So when you think about Jerry's HOA battle, you have to remember, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was the product of practice, timing, and a man who already knew how to take everyday frustrations and turn them into Southern Gothic theater. Without the $700 electric bill, there might not have been a turquoise shutter saga. Without one viral hit, maybe the next wouldn't have landed so perfectly. Practice doesn't just make perfect, it makes viral. And Jerry proved it by building a track record of transforming life's bills, fines, and annoyances into performances the internet couldn't resist. But Jerry's HOA story wasn't just entertainment. It hit a deeper nerve, because this wasn't just one man's fight with beige paint and trash cans. It was a symbol of something bigger about suburban life.
Now, let's zoom out. On the surface, Jerry's HOA letter was funny, a comedian mocking a board of suburban nitpickers. But underneath, it was a symbol of something much bigger, the ongoing tug-of-war between individuality and conformity in modern American life. HOAs were invented to create order. The idea was simple. Keep neighborhoods tidy, enforce rules, and preserve property values. Nobody wants to live next to a falling-apart house with weeds 3 feet tall, right? But somewhere along the way, the mission drifted. Instead of protecting neighborhoods, HOAs started policing them. And what began as a promise of order became a tool for control. Jerry's letter cut straight to the heart of that contradiction. When he described beige as the color of cowardice, he wasn't just talking about paint. He was talking about how HOAs flatten individuality into bland sameness. Turquoise shutters? Too bold. Trash can visible? Too messy. Vegetable garden in the front yard? Too unconventional. HOAs chase a vision of perfection that's less about community pride and more about erasing personality. And people are tired of it. Jerry's story resonated not just because it was funny, but because it exposed the absurdity of suburban conformity. It reminded people that behind every HOA fine is a bigger story. A neighbor losing a little bit of their freedom. A family forced to comply with rules that don't make sense. A homeowner silenced because their taste doesn't align with a committee. This isn't just about shutters, it's about culture. Suburbs were supposed to be places of comfort and community, but HOAs often make them places of surveillance and control. Jerry's Faulkner parody didn't just roast his own HOA, it roasted the very idea that communities thrive by being bland and identical. And here's the irony. Individuality is often what makes neighborhoods appealing. A pop of color, a quirky mailbox, a bold holiday display. Those are the things that make communities feel alive. But HOAs, obsessed with uniformity, crush that vitality. They think they're protecting property values, but what they're really protecting is monotony. That's why Jerry's bigger picture mattered. People read his post and saw more than just a comedian being funny. They saw themselves. They saw every time they'd been scolded for a lawn that grew too fast, or a car parked slightly out of line, or lights left up past New Year's. They saw the pettiness of HOAs distilled into one turquoise versus beige showdown. And Jerry gave them language for it. He gave them color of cowardice. He gave them clipboards for hearts. He gave them metaphors to describe the frustration they'd felt for years. That's powerful, because once people have words for their frustration, they can express it, share it, and laugh about it together. So yes, the HOA letter was funny, but it was also profound. It captured the absurdity of suburban conformity and turned it into a piece of art that people could rally around. Jerry's story wasn't just a roast. It was a cultural critique dressed in Faulkner's voice. And that's why it went viral. Not because it was silly, but because it was true. And if you thought Jerry was just a comedian cracking jokes, think again. His HOA letter wasn't just funny, it was resistance. Let's talk about how humor can be a weapon. Here's the thing about humor. It's not just entertainment. It's resistance. And Jerry Wayne Longmire's HOA letter wasn't just funny. It was rebellion dressed in Faulkner's Sunday best. Think about it. HOAs are designed to intimidate. Their letters are dry, clinical, and meant to make you feel small. They quote bylaws like scripture, drop fines like they're thunderbolts from Olympus, and frame their authority as unquestionable. Most homeowners, when faced with one of these notices, cave. They sigh, they comply, and they curse under their breath while painting their shutters beige. But Jerry, he didn't just push back. He laughed back. And laughter is powerful. Laughter breaks the spell. Once you start laughing at authority, it loses its grip on you. Jerry's Faulkner parody didn't just entertain. It stripped the HOA's words of their intimidation. Their unsightly trash can became a broke cousin overstaying his welcome. Their non-compliant shutters became a hymn to the Gulf waters of boyhood. Their beige demand became cowardice itself. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't a scary board of enforcers. It was a bunch of humorless characters in a comedy skit. This is the magic of humor as resistance. It flips the power dynamic. Normally, the HOA controls the story. They send the letter, you react. But Jerry flipped the script.
He made them the punchline. Instead of his neighbors whispering, "Did you hear Jerry got fined?" the internet was shouting, "Did you hear Jerry roasted his HOA like Faulkner?" That's a seismic shift. And here's why it worked so well. Humor connects. When Jerry shared his letter online, he wasn't just venting, he was building solidarity. Every comment, every share, every "same bro" was proof that his struggle was universal. Humor turns isolation into community. Instead of feeling alone against his HOA, Jerry suddenly had millions of people laughing with him, supporting him, and telling their own stories. That's resistance at scale. It's also worth pointing out that humor can cut deeper than anger. Anger can be dismissed as ranting. Legal threats can be bogged down in bureaucracy. But laughter spreads. Laughter lingers. When Jerry called beige the color of cowardice, that line didn't just sting in the moment, it stuck. It became a quote, a meme, a rallying cry. The HOA can't find that out of existence. This is why regimes, big or small, fear satire, because satire exposes absurdity in a way logic can't. HOAs claim they're protecting property values, but when a comedian compares their demands to cowardice, the truth hits harder than any statistic. They're not protecting values, they're protecting conformity. And conformity looks ridiculous when dressed in Faulkner's prose. Jerry's humor was also an act of defiance because it reframed the battle. Instead of being about fines and compliance, it became about art and freedom. He wasn't just defending his trash can or his shutters, he was defending his right to individuality. And he did it without rage or hostility. He did it with creativity. That's resistance with style. And that's why his HOA never stood a chance. Humor doesn't just punch. It dances around its opponent, leaving them flustered, frustrated, and powerless. Jerry didn't just beat his HOA at their own game, he changed the game entirely. And that brings us to the final truth. Because when the dust settled, the trash can rolled back in, and the turquoise shutters still shone bright, one thing became crystal clear. The HOA didn't just lose the battle, they lost their credibility.
At the end of the day, this wasn't just a funny story about a trash can and some shutters. It was a takedown, a dethroning, a reminder that sometimes the mighty clipboard-wielding HOA is no match for a sharp wit and a well-placed Faulkner reference. The HOA thought they were doing what they always do, enforcing rules, intimidating a resident, keeping things orderly. They expected Jerry to cave, to grumble, maybe to quietly comply. What they didn't expect was to become the laughingstock of the internet. And that's the beauty of it. HOAs thrive in silence. They operate best when their petty rules go unquestioned. But once their nonsense gets dragged into the spotlight, their authority crumbles. Jerry's letter didn't just defend his trash can, it torched their credibility. After all, how seriously can you take a group of adults who are outwitted by a comedian turning their fine notice into a Faulknerian verity? Once the internet got a hold of it, the HOA wasn't feared. They were ridiculed. And ridicule is the one thing an HOA can't recover from. This is the bigger legacy of Jerry's showdown. He didn't just win his case. He showed millions of people that HOAs aren't invincible. They're vulnerable to mockery. They're fragile when exposed. And they collapse when the public sees their rules for what they are, pettiness disguised as policy. Think about the symbolism. The trash can, the shutters. These weren't just random details. They were metaphors. The trash can represented the HOA's obsession with appearances. Their nitpicking over the tiniest infractions. The shutters represented individuality, color, and life. The very things HOAs often tried to bleach out of communities. Jerry's response framed the whole battle as a fight between conformity and creativity, cowardice and courage, beige and turquoise. And in that battle, the HOA never stood a chance. The aftermath is just as important as the letter itself, because now, every time someone searches HOA fine letter, Jerry's story pops up.
His words are archived, quoted, and shared. His roast outlived the notice. That's victory. The HOA may still send letters, may still issue fines, but in the court of public opinion, they've already lost. And let's be real, this is why people loved Jerry's story so much. It wasn't just that he made them laugh, it was that he gave them hope. Hope that they too could push back. Hope that they too could stand up to arbitrary rules. Hope that sometimes the little guy doesn't just win, he wins in style. That's why the HOA never stood a chance. Because they weren't just fighting Jerry Wayne Longmire, they were fighting Faulkner, comedy, the internet, and every frustrated homeowner who'd ever been fined for something ridiculous. That's an army no HOA can beat. So in the end, the tree lives, the shutters stay turquoise, the trash can remains a bin, and the HOA, well, the HOA is left holding nothing but their beige paint swatches and a reputation in ruins. And that, my friends, is what poetic justice looks like in suburbia. So there you have it. 10 facts from the Faulknerian HOA showdown that prove once again, HOAs may have bylaws, but we've got punchlines. If this story made you laugh, rage, or consider painting your own shutters turquoise just out of spite, smash that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to HOA Wars for more battles where suburban pettiness meets poetic justice. Because, let's face it, the HOA never stood a chance, but the laughs, they're here to stay.